So Jason, we're just so happy that you're here with us today. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Lindsay, and the Beyond the Boardroom team for having me today. We are going to chat about all things elections. It's a really good course. There's a lot of helpful information. And being that we're, oh my goodness, here in the middle of August already, it's really pertinent information. So I think you'll like the way we tackle today's course. It's going to be a before, during, and after approach to all things elections. So, with that said, there are dramatically different approaches for condominiums and HOAs throughout the election process. So the slides are really identifiable. You're going to see in the header whether we're talking about a condo or whether we're talking about an HOA. And of course, I'm going to make a point to emphasize those distinctions as we go throughout the presentation. But it's really neat and interesting exercise, I think, because some of you manage condominiums, but you also manage HOAs. Some of you maybe have lived in a condominium in the past, but now you live in an HOA. And so I think it's a really helpful approach to walk through the pre, during, and post election process and weave in the similarities and differences between the condominiums and the HOAs. So that's what we're going to do here today. It's an hour course, so we have a lot of information to get over in a relatively short period of time. I think I'm going to try to make it around 45, 50 minutes, right, Diane, just to make sure we have some time for a Q&A at the end.
Yes, please.
Okay, you got it, you got it. And there are 44 slides, so, doing the math on that, we're going to have to get through some things rapid fire, auctioneer style voice from time to time. And there might be some slides that I just don't emphasize as much as others because they're not as pertinent to the audience as a whole. That's okay. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, feedbacks, any of that stuff, please feel free to put it in the chat. We'll do our best to address it real time, announce the question so that it can benefit the entire room and answer it as concisely as possible. If I don't get to your question today, or if it's more specific for your community, because again, when you're talking about elections, as opposed to maybe collections or covenant enforcement, some of it's really unique and specific to your communities. Just shoot me an email. You can see my email address here on this second slide. I put it in the chat box, and I'll continue to do so throughout the course because I want to make sure you get your questions answered. I want to make sure to bring as much value as possible to this course. And last but certainly not least, if you want a copy of this PowerPoint, please just shoot me an email and say, hey, can I have a copy of the elections PowerPoint? And I'll shoot it back to you in PDF style, no problem at all. So if you want a copy of this course just because this is your idea of your leisurely weekend reading, which probably is not the case, but if it is, I'll appreciate and respect that. Or if you just want to have it for reference or maybe share it with a fellow board member or one of the other CAMs in your team, that's great too. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the course. We're going to talk about, again, the three phases or stages of elections: pre-election, where you need to do your prep work, make sure that you have all your questions, answers in advance; the during, so that the meeting runs smoothly and efficiently and you have no major headaches in front of a room full of people; and the post, so that you then transition into the roles for your elected board, and that way they can operate the community as well as possible. So right off the bat, when we're talking about the distinction between the condominiums and the HOAs, and I took a quick peek, and I'm pretty sure, as in most cases, we have a mixture of both on the call. So that's why I think it leads to such good discussion. For the condominium folks on the call, you are heavily regulated by Chapter 718, which is the condominium statute. And in fact, Chapter 718 gives you an awful lot of guidance on which boxes to check to go through your election process, okay? It's significantly different than the HOA folks, where Chapter 720, which is the Homeowners Association statute, just regularly says, check your governing documents, check your governing documents, check your governing documents. So heavily regulated by the statute. For the condos, not so much for the HOAs. Each set of documents are unique in their own regard. All right. So again, you can see here in the header when we're talking about on every given slide, it's going to distinguish between condos and HOAs. That way there's no confusion. So Unless stated otherwise in the bylaws, the board shall be composed of 5 members. Okay, so again, your bylaws may say differently, but if not, it's going to default to 5 members. And of course, you're going to have a president, a secretary, a treasurer, um, and the like. All right. If you're a very, very small condominium of 5 units or less, you have to have at least 3 members of the community serve on the board. So the default for most of the folks on the call here today is going to be 5 members. If you're a teeny tiny condominium, then you're going to have at least 3 members, which is obviously, a huge portion of the membership. Okay. And as far as, again, terms for condominium folks, unless you have staggered terms, the terms of all board members expire at the annual meeting, and such members may stand for reelection unless you're prohibited by your bylaws. Okay. You may serve longer than a year if the bylaws allow. Okay. You may have, again, staggered terms. You may have different term limits. So that's going to be unique to your community. What applies to everybody on the call, regardless of what your documents say, is that a board member may not serve more than 8 consecutive years unless approved by 2/3 of the membership, or as in many cases, there are just not enough people that want to participate. Okay. And so this went into place, this statutory addition went into place in July 1st of 2018. So next year, doing the simple math on July 1st of 2026, that's where we're going to potentially run into this situation where you're saying, oh, you had 8 consecutive years. It's time for somebody else to step up and serve the community. But again, maybe you're doing just such an awesome job, which is often the case, that the membership says, you know what? We don't care that it's been 8 years. We want you to stay on board. You're doing fantastic. Or, on the other end of that spectrum, maybe nobody knows you're even serving on the board because you're in a community that, unfortunately, and you wouldn't be alone if this was the case, you don't get a whole heck of a lot of participation, in which case then you can stay on if nobody else wants to step up and help you out. All right. If you do have vacancies on your board, unless the bylaws provide otherwise, you're going to the board can appoint a replacement to serve and fill the director's term until the next electing board member. So that's going to be a situation where, let's say you have a 5-member board, right? And somebody resigns. Okay, that happens as long as it's in writing. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. Then the remaining directors by majority vote can vote to appoint a replacement for that board member. Okay. Right. And just remember, some of you may be in the situation where an election is not required if the number of vacancies, let's say you have 3 vacancies, equals or exceeds the number of candidates. Again, it always comes down to a participation, situation here for many of these communities. All right. But again, remember, if you have a vacancy, the affirmative vote, a majority of the directors can then appoint that position if need be. Okay. Even if there's only 1 or 2 directors, which catches some people off guard at times. Eligibility is a really important slide here, really, really important slide. There's a lot of things to keep in mind here and a lot of questions that sometimes stem from this, eligibility conversation. So, keep in mind that any unit owner or other eligible person, and why it says other eligible person, because some of your governing documents don't even require board members to be members of the community, but hopefully they're few and far between for a lot of the folks on this call. But any eligible person desiring to be a candidate for the board must give written notice of his or her intent at least 40 days before the scheduled election. Okay, so you can't miss that deadline. All right. And you have to be eligible at the time you give that intent to run for the board. Okay. That's an important part, because you may be ineligible, say by bullet point number 3, which is, a person who is delinquent in any assessment owed to the association on the day that they're submitting their candidacy is deemed to be ineligible for the board. The same holds true for the HOA folks, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. But again, if you're delinquent in any assessment to the association, you're not going to be eligible to be a candidate. And in fact, you shouldn't even be on those ballots. Okay. The last bullet point here is pretty interesting. Hopefully it's a situation that doesn't pop up for your community, but it does come across my desk quite a bit, so it's worth discussing. A person who's been convicted of a felony in Florida or in another jurisdiction, let's say in Georgia, where we here in Florida acknowledge that to be a felony, can't serve on the board unless the civil rights have been restored for at least 5 years. Okay, so felony in Florida, all right, or maybe felony in another jurisdiction where we here in Florida say, yeah, we agree. We also define that as a felony. Civil rights have to be restored for at least 5 years. A question I get a lot is, okay, we didn't know about that, and the board took certain actions, there was board votes, whatever it may be. Does that wipe out everything that we've done? And the answer is no. Okay, it doesn't invalidate any of the decisions that the board made prior to the board becoming aware of this situation. Moreover, there's no statutory requirement that you do, any type of digging or detective work in advance on your candidates to see if the felony conviction portion here would apply. Okay, but as soon as you knew or a reasonable person should have known, that's when you step in and take action. All right. As far as for most of you on the call, condominiums of more than 10 units, please know that co-owners of a unit, John and Jane Doe, whatever it may be, may not serve on the board together unless they own more than one unit. So let's say John and Jane Doe are record title owners of units 1 through 10. That would be a different situation. Or again, it always comes back to this participation topic. They can serve on the board together if there are not enough eligible candidates. And remember what we just talked about a little bit as far as eligibility is concerned, right? Okay. Putting the HOA hat on here for a quick second. And again, we're going to talk about some of these pre-election conversations and topics with the HOAs as well as we kind of move through the process and procedures here. Again, you're not going to get a whole heck of a lot of help from Chapter 720, which is the HOA statute. Rather, you're going to get your guidance from your governing documents. And it's really important to be careful and be mindful of what your governing documents read, to get with your management team, to get with your legal counsel in advance of your meetings, in advance of your elections, so that you have your T's crossed and your I's dotted. Because what your election process and procedures may be for your community could be dramatically different than the community just to your right or to your left, okay? Moreover, while there's a lot of helpful conversation online and articles that you can glance and familiarize yourself with, you have to be careful what you find on the internet, because again, when you're talking about elections for both HOAs and condos, but specifically for your HOA folks, really you can't conclusively answer some of these steps without looking at the documents themselves, okay? Now, going back to the number of board members, remember for our condominium folks, we said at least 5 members, unless another number is stated, or if you have a really tiny community, 3 members, right? For the HOAs, it's really going to depend on what your governing documents say. You're going to consist of 3 or more individuals, okay? But, there's oftentimes brackets within your governing documents, no less than 3, no more than 7, or whatever it may be. Also, the way that you go about, potentially shifting the size of your board is really unique as well. So I just got this question a couple weeks ago from 2 different clients on the same exact day. Literally, they both asked me, 2 different clients, completely unrelated, how do we go about increasing or decreasing our board? And the answer that I gave them was each completely different, because I reviewed the first community's governing documents and it said membership vote. And they were like, boo, that's difficult. My goodness, we can't get a membership vote for anything. That's bad news. And I said, I'm sorry, that's just the way the documents read. Sometimes it doesn't read that way. And then when I reviewed the other community's question to that point, it said that the board could increase or decrease the size and number of board members. And they were happy about that answer because, again, they thought it was a little bit easier to accomplish, of course. So again, importance of reviewing the documents. When a vacancy arises, again, same as we talked about for the condominium folks, and you can see once again that it says HOAs in the header here, and you can see that we'll emphasize when there's similarities and differences. Again, the remaining board members can appoint the replacement member by a majority vote if there's a vacancy in the board. All right. Eligibility is pretty similar for HOAs as it is for condos, so a couple of different additional sections in the HOA statute that I'll point out. I'll first jump to C, which is the felony conviction language. That's the same for HOAs and condos. Okay. B is also pretty much the same. The person serving on the board who becomes more than 90 days delinquent in the payment of any monetary obligation is deemed to have abandoned their seat. I think we talked a little bit about that at the beginning of the presentation. If not, same would apply for the condos. Obviously, if you're delinquent on the last day, you could be seek election. You're not gonna be eligible as well. We did talk about that for the condominium folks. There's another one. If you jump down to D here on this slide, it seems like common sense right off the bat. I completely agree. If you read it, just glanced it and kept moving, you'd say, well, of course, anybody that has a pending charge of felony theft or embezzlement shouldn't be on the board, right? That's common sense. Of course, that's the case. And I would say, yeah, if you glance and read it, that would make a lot of sense. But when you look at the specific wording a little closer, you'll notice that it says pending charge. So this applies without a conviction. If you have a pending charge, even if that charge is later dismissed, if it's still pending at the time, you can't seek election. Even if they have the wrong person, you say, what are you talking about? It wasn't me, it was John down the street. The charge got brought against me inadvertently, whatever it may be. Until it's cleared, that individual would not be able to serve on the board. All right. So as we switch back into condominiums here, and we're going to go through like a little bit of a checklist type of situation. Again, this is all the prep work so that your meeting's easy. A lot of people like this approach for the condominiums because, again, it just kind of maps it out. In an industry where there's so much gray area, there's so much ambiguity, this kind of maps it out for you. So a lot of folks do like this, especially folks in the condos here. So at least 60 days before the election, the association shall mail, deliver, or electronically transmit your first notice of the election, okay? Now, it doesn't give you a bracket. It says at least 60 days before. It doesn't say, but no longer than. So, use your discretion here. I don't want you sending this first notice out 200 days before your election, although, it probably would be sufficient unless you had some other language in your governing documents. But you want this first notice to go, around that 75 to 90 day mark. I think that's the sweet spot. And it's going to include the date, time, and location of the meeting and how an owner may become a candidate with their intent to run form, okay? Moving down to bullet point number 2, we talked about the intent to run a few slides prior, again, trying to incorporate this all intentionally. Again, you have to be eligible at this point in time for the condominiums 40 days before the scheduled election. You have to be eligible to submit your intent to run form. And reasons why you may not be eligible are a felony conviction where your civil rights haven't been restored, a monetary obligation owed to the association, etc. They can't make life totally easy on us, so they have to just give us more dates to remember here. But then if you move down to the third bullet point, you say that at least 35 days prior to the meeting, this is where a candidate can submit their candidate information sheet. All right. So why they didn't just have it submitted with the intent to run, people smarter than me came up with that. I don't know. But, that's it. At least 60 days first notice, intent to run at least 40 days, candidate information sheet at least 35 days. Now, something that comes up a lot, I got this question from a client a few weeks back, which I thought was really funny. So somebody submitted a candidate information sheet, which was the most impressive candidate information sheet humanly imaginable, right? To the point where I'm like, wow, this person's super qualified. Like, they should be the CEO of Microsoft or something rather than running for the condo board. But nonetheless, that's who submitted their candidate information sheet, right? And I had a few people say, I'm calling on it. I'm calling BS on it. I think that that's fabricated. That's an extreme exaggeration of this individual's qualifications, so on and so forth. Probably so. I don't know. We don't have an obligation to fact check all of that because that's a question that I get a lot, nor are we responsible for the contents of it. Because believe it or not, years back, I actually had a homeowner or a unit owner that wanted to sue the association because this homeowner said, well, you should have pulled the candidate information sheet because John Doe blatantly lied in it. And, we responded with, we're not liable for the contents. Okay. It's a little bit of an honor system there. Of course, there's campaigning that goes on in your communities. I think you all know that, could share some stories. But we're not liable for the contents. We can't fact check all of this for every single candidate. Okay. Friendly reminder, if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, happy to provide it. Shoot me an email, jmartell@martellnozim.com. And I know there's a lot of questions in the chat too. I'm just go figure, as an attorney, I'm long-winded, shocker there. So I'm trying to keep us on our time schedule here, but I will peek at the chat a little bit. And I know Lindsay and Diane have time allocated at the very end, so I'll try to answer as many questions as possible there too. So I really appreciate y'all. Now we're moving to the last notice, which is the second notice for the condominiums here. Again, you see the checklist. It's pretty nice and simple. I think it maps things out nicely for us. We do have a bracket here. Thank goodness. All right. We do have a bracket here because it's not less than 14 days nor more than 34 days before the election. You're going to send this second notice. Okay. The second notice that's going to include the agenda, the ballots, the candidate information sheet, how to vote, all of that good stuff. So we have first notice, intent to run, candidate information sheet, second notice. Okay. So we're moving along pretty well here. As far as your ballot's concerned, okay, so we have to make sure that the ballot has strict compliance with the statute, okay? For starters, I do want to point out that the names on the ballot are going to be in alphabetical last name, okay? I have had this also, and I'm sure some of you have as well. I think the ballot should be listed in the order of which the candidate submitted. I think the ballot should be listed in the order of which who has lived here the longest. I've actually had all of those. It's going to be in alphabetical order by last name. Just double check your spelling on that. Okay. But for our condominium folks, we have this inner envelope, outer envelope system that works really well. Okay. Your outer envelope is going to have the owner's unit number, unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, the name, exactly how it appears on the deed, John Doe, Jane Doe, whoever it may be, and then a signature line. Okay. And then the inner envelope is going to be completely blank. Okay. And that's where you're going to put your ballot in. Okay. That's where you're going to put your ballot in. And again, one ballot per inner envelope. If you own more than one unit, that's fine. Okay, you can vote per unit, but you're going to have multiple inner envelopes and one ballot per inner envelope. Okay. Told you I'd find ways to shed some time when we can. So I'm not going to talk about falsifying ballots because nobody on this call would do that. And if you do have that situation, then we have a longer conversation ahead of us. So we'll jump forward here. But when you talk about, now we're talking about HOAs here, and again, going through the same process, look at the dramatic differences here. I just went through that 4-step approach with the 2 notices and everything in between for the condos. For the HOAs, we do not have that, okay? You just have to provide not less than 14 days prior to the meeting notice to your membership, okay? And just know that you're only going to have the previously discussed condominium approach if you amend your declaration and your governing documents to allow for it, which some communities do. But unless you have that approach that we just walked through for the condominiums, that's not going to apply to the HOAs. Again, if you amend your governing documents, maybe it does. But if you don't have it, you have your at least 14 days advance notice requirement with the corresponding affidavit saying that we did things by the book. Okay. Notices are going to be mailed or delivered to not only the subject property, but also the mailing address, if there's an additional mailing address that's put on record with the association by the homeowner, okay? And it's really important that the homeowner notifies you, your management team, in writing if he or she has a secondary mailing address. Really, really important, okay? Because if somebody just tells you at the mailbox or while you're working out in the club in the gym or whatever it may be, that's not sufficient, okay? They need to put in writing that I am the record title owner of 123 ABC Street, okay? But my mailing address is, ABC Street, okay? That's really important. That's the owner's obligation, all right? So as we transition into running the elections, okay, so we have our pre-suit process and procedures satisfied, and now if we go into running the elections, we hope that all the legwork that we did leading up to this makes the election run as smoothly as possible. Because as we know, when it becomes election night and everybody's there, there's a lot going on. Sometimes it can get a little chaotic, and I want you just to be breathing easy, knowing that the bulk of the legwork is already done. Okay. So differences galore here between condos and HOAs, as you'll see in the upcoming slide. So members of the board shall be elected by a written ballot or voting machine for the condos, that inner envelope, outer envelope system that we just talked about. You cannot vote by proxy for condominiums, or as we'll learn in a second, that you can for HOAs, okay? If 20% of the ballots of the total voting interest are received by the meeting, okay, the association can hold election, okay? You don't have a specific quorum requirement. It's 20% of the ballots of the total voting interest, okay? If you do not meet that threshold, then the existing board continues to serve by what's called the holdover doctrine, okay? And they hold over until the next year's election, not for another 2, 3, 4, 5-year terms or whatever it may be, okay? Sure that they do so, make sure that they do so in front of everybody. Okay, we want it to be as transparent as possible. Okay, no more ballots are going to be collected after the first envelope is open. That's where everything is closed. Then the counting begins. And again, remember, it's going to be done because I'm not sure if somebody got cut off here. I apologize if you did. I just want to continue to emphasize that that impartial committee that's appointed by the board to count the votes needs to do so in eyesight of everybody that's attending, okay? If you go through your roster, line things up, and you feel like there are some deficiencies with the envelopes or the ballots, that happens. It's not unique. We want to cut it down as much as possible, but it does happen. What you need to do is mark those envelopes as disregarded. Sorry, everybody. Apologize whoever may have missed a slide or two there. I think we're back and ready to go. Okay, we're on slide 21. We're back in slide 21, and not to be redundant, but I'll walk through things just very quickly here on this slide before we go to the next. No write-in candidates are permitted, okay? The board's going to appoint an impartial committee to count the votes. That committee is going to do so within eyesight of the membership, not in closet down the hall for nobody to see, okay? If you have any problems as you go through your roster and check your envelopes and ballots, it does happen from time to time. You wouldn't be alone. We hope it doesn't, but if it does happen, you're going to mark disregarded real big on those envelopes. But please note, don't throw them away. They're still part of the official records that you're required to keep for 1 year, okay? Also, I highly recommend that you have blank ballots ready to go because people can vote right then and there at your meeting. Okay, so a quick summary of that slide, and I'll get us back on track here. Here we go. As far as the HOAs are concerned, election is not required if the association fails to obtain a quorum. In that particular instance, we would have the holdover doctrine, just like as we mentioned 2 slides ago for the condominiums. But just know that unless a lower number is provided in the bylaws, the percentage of the voting interest that is going to constitute a quorum will be 30% of the total voting interest. 30% of the total voting interest. So that is your ceiling. For HOAs, that is your ceiling, okay? You may have 10% in your governing documents, which is great. There we go. Let's shrink it down to 10%. But if your governing documents say, for easy example, 40%, boop, you bump back down to that 30% threshold, okay? All right, let me see how we're doing on time. I'll pick up the pace a little bit, I promise. I mentioned a moment ago, no proxies for condos, just kind of disregard that. But for HOAs, you're like, hey, proxies are everything. That's how we accomplish anything within our community. So just know about proxy must be dated, state the date, time, and place of the meeting for which it was given, and signed by the authorized person executing the proxy. What's really going to come into play here in some membership meetings, not just elections, but membership meetings where you adjourn and reconvene your meeting, okay? So let's say that there's still business to be had, still a threshold to reach, whatever it may be needed, you can announce at the meeting, okay, we're here August 13th already, so that's scary, 2025, and say, hey folks, we are adjourning the meeting and we'll reconvene on August 25th, 2025 at 6 p.m. at wherever you're going to meet at, okay? And by doing so, the proxies that you have in hand right then and right there apply to your reconvene meeting because they're good for 90 days. Again, and that's the whole point, right? We might need some additional proxies. Let's not have to retrieve the ones that we already have that are sufficient, okay? So that's kind of the gist there. All righty. We're moving along. We're moving along. I promise you. Y'all are doing good. You're being patient. I know you have some questions, and we're going to get them answered, whether that's, right here today or maybe, in an email or a phone call tomorrow, right? We'll make sure they're answered. Nominations from the floor, not going to happen in a condo, okay? Not going to happen on a condo. Can it happen in an HOA? Typical attorney answer, it depends. It depends because it's really dictated by how your governing documents read. If you have nominations in advance of the meeting, similar to what condominiums are required to do, then you don't have to take nominations from the floor. If you're completely silent in your documents, you probably do. And what catches some people off guard is that you can nominate yourself, okay, that's great, but you can't nominate somebody else. So if there's a little discussion going on and a group of homeowners say, oh, you know what, Sally would do a great job. Sally's been in the community forever. Sally served on the board in the past, whatever it may be. You can't just say, I nominate Sally, and everybody say, yeah, rah, 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 let's go. Sally has to say, yeah, I nominate myself for that position. All right. Lord forbid you would ever have a tie in your community. Goodness gracious. If you have a tie for HOAs, what do? Again, typical attorney answer, it depends. You might have some guidance in your governing documents. Whew, that would be nice. You might not. If you don't have specific guidance in your governing documents and you're an HOA, we truly do try to just have a reasonable combination with the folks and see if we can see if somebody would say, you know what, I'm glad to serve on the ARB instead, or whatever it may be. More often than not, we can resolve it that way if we don't have guidance from the documents. If we are a condominium, then we have a runoff process, just more work, right? More administrative work, just what you want to do after you put all that time and energy into your election is to have another one. No sooner than 21 days, but not longer than 30 days. So don't miss your window there. And we'd have a runoff election between the candidates. All right. Let's see where we're at here. Okay. Yep. We're right where we need to be. Okay. All righty. So you might have a situation where you have a suspension of voting rights. Okay, it is sometimes a tool that communities use when you have um, difficult members, to put it nicely. I will be the first to admit, and I'm not breaking any news here, that it's probably more beneficial to suspend their use rights. I mean, you'll probably get more compliance from a member who's violating some of the covenants and restrictions or delinquent or whatever it may be if you don't let them use the pool or the gym than if you suspend their voting rights. But hey, I like to think that that matters to folks. So if you're suspending voting rights, just you can see the process here for both HOAs and condos, and just know that you reduce your percentages if you properly suspend somebody's voting rights. Meaning, 100 lots now becomes 99, and the threshold for such drops down accordingly. Okay, but again, I'm not so sure if you're going to get a lot of reaction on suspending somebody's voting rights. Maybe you will, maybe you don't. All right. Let's jump forward here, kind of just to keep on track time-wise and talk about electronic voting. All right, so for electronic voting, this has come a long way, and we actually teach courses just on electronic voting. If your community is a fan of electronic voting, I'm good with that. I'm good with that. There are many reputable companies now that know the statutory requirements here in Florida, as opposed to when the electronic voting statute was first adopted, which I believe was July of 2017, which boy, time flies. It's wild to think about. When the electronic voting statute was first adopted, boy, oh boy, we just didn't know what to do with it. There's just too many gray areas. There are no companies here in the state that really could cross all the T's and dot all the I's. And in fact, when you would go to these trade shows or networking events or whatever it may be, a lot of companies would come in town and they'd say, hey, I'm here from Colorado. Hey, I'm here from Texas. Let me tell you about our product. And the product was nice for those states, but it didn't satisfy what we needed here in Florida. Now, we're fortunate enough to have a number of good companies that can certainly help you out with electronic voting. I will say this, if you're interested in electronic voting, it's worth a quick 30-minute free Zoom meeting. I can send you a couple of different companies that I know have done a good job for many of the communities we represent. I don't have any affiliation with any of them, and I don't care if you adopt it or not. But if you're interested, it's worth the conversation because, again, it's free, and it can be done via a Zoom meeting, and they can show you what they have to offer, the cost that would be, for your particular association, and then you can make a decision based off that. But just know that you don't need to have the authority in the declaration. You can have the authority through a board resolution. There's a meeting where the membership can show up and ask some questions and maybe state their pleasure or displeasure with electronic voting, but they can't change the board decision if you want to adopt it. So that's all good and dandy. For our condominium folks, know that there are big changes with House Bill 913, whether it comes to electronic voting, many of which are a conversation for another day when we go over the specific legal update, but I don't want to leave you hanging entirely. Just know that for condominiums, there's now language saying that 25%, of the total voting interest can petition to require the board to adopt electronic voting, okay? And moreover, there is a way that if you don't have electronic voting, that now members are able to vote via email, which I'm glad we're not in person because I don't want you guys throwing anything at me. It's a don't shoot the messenger type situation. But again, when we have our legal update coming up here next week and a couple more to come, we'll go through those House bill changes and what they mean for your communities. Okay. But again, electronic voting, you're going to store votes, you're going to authenticate the votes, you're going to give an opt-in, opt-out process for your homeowners. And just know it doesn't replace this. I think probably the most important thing I should emphasize real quickly here before I move on is electronic voting doesn't replace everything we just talked about. It supplements. So you can't force a member to participate in electronic voting. Okay. Again, it supplements your election process and procedures. All right. All righty, here we are. Okay, got about 15. Yeah, there we go. We're good. We're good. We're trucking along here. Okay. So you made it through barely by the skin of your teeth, maybe sometimes. And we had a well-ran and organized election, whew, which I wish that upon all of you as we, approach the middle of August here. And I know you have some elections coming up. So what do we do after the meeting? Okay. Well, I'm going to spend a few moments on this slide right here specifically because the most common questions that Lindsay, Diane, and I get these days are about the educational requirements for you as board members, if you're board members on the call, and from CAMS about, hey, what do we go back and tell our board members? Okay. It's probably the most popular question that we get nowadays. So for condominiums, within 90 days after being elected or appointed, you must certify in writing to the secretary that you've read the governing documents, all 3,000 pages of them, right? And you'll do your very best to uphold them, relying on your management team, your legal counsel, your insurance carrier, and your other trusted vendors. And again, don't shoot the messenger. And you have to take a 4-hour board certification course. Yikes. Yikes. That course is valid for 7 years, assuming you have no interruption in your service on the board. Okay. But there's no way around it. 4 hours is an awful long time. And I think that's a big, big ask of volunteer board members. You can go to the DBPR, Department of Business and Professional Regulation website. They have a free course that they offer every couple of weeks online, and you can take it there. Currently, I'm not teaching the 4-hour condo board certification course. Condo. Got to emphasize that, just because it is so incredibly time consuming. And the DBPR does have a course on their website you can take. For HOAs, as many of you probably know, I teach the HOA board certification course multiple times per month for free via Zoom at different times of the day. Most of the courses are between 6 and 8 p.m. Sometimes I run at 11 to 1 or whatever it may be, just because I know everybody's schedule is different. But for the HOAs, again, yes, if you're not already on my email blast, shoot me an email. I'm happy to include you. You're not going to get a bunch of spam emails from me every day. I promise. My only emails that go out are with my course schedules, legislative updates, case law things, changes that come up, just informational things. That's it. I promise. But if you're not, you can certainly shoot me an email, jmartell@martellnozum.com. I'll add you to the list. Again, I teach 2-3 HOA board certification courses per month. And those are 2 hours. Okay. Those are 2 hours. Sometimes I get questions from folks that say, I swear I heard the HOA needs to be 4 hours. It does not. Mine does not. I have the certificate from the DBPR, been teaching it for a long, long time. So it does not need to be 4 hours. My HOA is going to be for 2 hours. Okay. And then in addition to that, you're going to need additional continuing education, like the course we're talking about here today. So if you're fewer than 2,500 lots within an HOA, you're going to need 4 hours. But again, the board certification course is 2, and that applies. So you need 2 additional hours. If you're a large HOA, 2,500 or more lots, you need 8 hours. But again, the HOA board certification course is 2, and it chips away at that number. So you're going to need 6 hours. And as Diane mentioned at the beginning, I love teaching the courses. A lot of what we're talking about gets broken down into sub parts, so we can spend a little bit more time on them. The rapid fire, 50 minutes or so, and they would satisfy these requirements. So again, love to have you on the list and love to have you join the courses. All right. So a little bit about what's required of you from an educational standpoint. I'm going to leave the slide here on disputes because none of you are going to have disputes, but if you need it, there it is for you. As far as resignation is concerned, I mentioned a moment ago, things happen in the heat of the moment at these meetings, right? They certainly happen. People, differences pop up and emotions get the best of us sometimes. And folks sometimes say, that's it, I'm done. I want nothing to do with this association anymore. I'm off the board. That's verbal, and that isn't sufficient. We're going to need a resignation in writing. Email is typically sufficient, as well, as long as it's clear what the email is communicating. So if you're in that situation and you have a board member that shouts that they're done with the community, they're off the board, or whatever it may be, verbally, pick and choose the moment at that time, or maybe the next day to say, gotta send us that in writing, okay? Because that is the requirement. All right, as far as official records are concerned, and this is pretty much wrapping up, because I'm going to leave some slides for you to digest, but I don't feel the need to walk through intentionally. Everything that we chatted about, all things related to your election, the ballots, the sign-in sheets, the proxies, all that good stuff needs to be maintained as an official record for the association for at least 1 year, because they are subject to a records inspection request. Okay. Hopefully you're all satisfying the website requirement these days, where you say, you know what, let's cut down on those records inspection requests and me having to sit there for 4 hours at a time, or whatever it may be, with a member as they go through boxes and all of that fun stuff. You can put a lot of this information online. Okay. Again, there are some slides in here about bad acts, bad behavior, wrongdoing. The last couple of legislative sessions, our folks in Tallahassee have felt the need to continue to put language in various portions of the statute saying, hey, you're going to get in trouble if you do really bad things like threatening or using bribery, or things that you'll see on these slides. Self-explanatory stuff. Of course, I need to make sure it's in your presentation, but I'm gonna end there. I think we covered an awful lot of material. Sorry for the quick tech mishap, but I think we got back on track really, really quickly. And I'll leave it to Lindsay. Do you want me to answer some questions? I know the questions and elections go all over the board. I'm happy to. You tell me, what do you think best?
Sure. So we can answer some questions. There were a few questions that were in the chat earlier. One was, if the board is 5 members and there are 2 vacant seats, is the quorum still 3?
Yes, it is. That would apply typically for both condominiums and associations. So I'm sorry, the quorum is 2 out of 3 in that situation, as long as those 3 members know that they can appoint the 2 replacements by a majority vote to get it back to 5. But for the time being, if you don't have anybody that wants to fill those 2 spots, or you don't have a good candidate, there is some discretion there. You don't have to necessarily appoint somebody if you reasonably believe that he or she may not be appropriate for the position. Then your quorum would likely be 2 out of the 3. Unless there's something really unique in the governing documents. Again, that's one of those situations where, I would, if you ask me that as a client, have to check the governing documents to confirm, but I can say most likely, because again, I want to be as helpful as possible on the call, 2 out of the 3 in that situation.
Sure. And everyone, do keep in mind, a lot of times Jason can give you a generic answer, but your documents are specific to your association. So, it could be different for you than for the general population. Gloria, you did have a question, and it was a question on COA elections. Mr. Martell said the term expires in 1 year. This board has canceled the election, refuses to reset it. The term is up. Now what? Are you saying there is not a board?
No, so that's a really difficult question, and I'm sorry that your community is going through that. So it's a 1 year unless your governing documents say otherwise for condominiums in that situation. And so the board has to make a reasonable attempt to hold an election every year. You can't intentionally attempt to not have an election, if that makes sense. If you make reasonable efforts to hold the election pursuant to Chapter 718 and your own governing documents, then and you just don't get the numbers that you need, unfortunately, the holdover doctrine would apply. the holdover doctrine applies just till the next year's election. It doesn't then, fill a 2, 3, 4 year term if you would so happen to have those in your governing documents. So no, it's 1 year unless the documents say otherwise, which it potentially could. The board has to make a reasonable effort, and they're going to do this through the work, working hard with their management team and their legal counsel to hold the election. If we unfortunately just don't meet our threshold, which in the condominium section is, remember, 20% of the ballots of the total voting interest, a quorum's not necessarily needed. If we don't get that threshold, absent not knowing how some of the other documents may read, then that's going to hold over until the next year's election.
Okay, and Gloria, I see that you do have some other questions. I would recommend that you reach out to Jason. I will put his email in the chat at the end because some of your questions are going to be specific to your association. So I think it's going to be difficult for him to probably answer those questions.
Yeah.
And then do the remaining board members have to fill empty seats? So I guess the question is, if a couple people resign or enough people didn't put their name in the hat, do they have to fill the empty seats?
Yeah, that's a good question. So whether it's an HOA or a condo, my answer is going to apply to both. Let's say you have a 5-member board, which we know may be the case for each condominium and association, condo by statute, HOA by documents, right? And let's say 2 members resign, leaving you 3 board members. You can still conduct business. You can absolutely conduct business. You don't have to appoint the remaining 2 spots if there are not anybody willing to fill them, or there's not a qualified candidate in your reasonable opinion. There's some discretion there. There really is. And, the case law is going to be really fact specific on situations. I would say you don't neglect filling them. You try to fill them at a reasonable time. If you have to take action on an item, within the next couple of days and you don't have time to fill them, generally the courts have ruled that's fine also. But you make a reasonable attempt to fill them within a reasonable time. And if you get quality replacements for those 2 seats, then you can appoint them. And if you don't, there are situations where, an otherwise 5-member board operates for a period of time as 3 or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and that does happen because, as we all know, sometimes it's difficult to get homeowners to volunteer their time depending on the association. And some, we know there's a lot of responsibility for board members and some there's not. So it can be difficult. I've experienced that in my time as a CAM. So definitely happens. Jason, thank you so much. Maybe if you don't mind, if you'll give a quick little, I guess, introduction of what you're going to present on Thursday, maybe House Bill 913, just some generic info so everyone knows what they can look forward to if they're going to attend.
You got it. Yeah, I appreciate everybody's time. There's an awful lot of information in this course. I understand that, and some things are really unique to your community. So thank you very much for your time and patience as we work through a lot of material. I'll echo your comments, Lindsay, very quickly and say participation is tricky for a lot of communities. So if you're one of those communities where I talked about it quite a bit during the call that just doesn't get the participation you need or whatever it may be, don't feel like you're on an island, like you're all alone. That is unfortunately common. It's a volunteer position. It's oftentimes a thankless job. Lindsay, Diane, and I, we're super appreciative of all you do. We know it, but some other members just admittedly don't know what goes into it. So we're really appreciative of your time, and we're there to help you navigate situations where you're just not getting the member participation you need. As far as the legal update, next week, join us. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to have a lot of fun. I love being in person. I may or may not throw things into the audience or have some additional giveaways or some things to make sure you're having a good time. But we're going to be talking about a lot of key items, including House Bill 913, which specifically for the condominium folks brought a lot of changes, some good, some bad, some ugly. So, there are additional requirements as far as electronic voting, like I mentioned, voting via email, record keeping, things of that nature, reserves. There's topic. It's wide range. When you have the legal update, They don't say, hey, here's a beautifully put together puzzle and it just all makes complete sense. It's really the opposite. They're like, hey, here's a bunch of mud and I'm going to throw it on the wall. And, we have to transition from one topic to the next. But the good thing about what we do with the legal update is that we not only provide you with a legal update, which of course we should, we provide context on the areas that we're discussing. Because again, we're not going to just say, here's a slide on apples and then here's a slide on cookies. They don't relate. We're going to make those transitions as seamless as we can, provide context, refreshers, all of that fun stuff. So I'd love to see you all in person. I think it's going to be a really good time. We're going to make it a lot of fun.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for coming to attend. I am going to put something in the chat right now that will give you instructions on how to get credit for this course. Please, please, please follow the instructions. We do require a separate email for each course. So if you're attending this course now, and then you're going to also attend the course that we're starting in 10 minutes, you will need to email for both courses separately because we have to keep a record for the DBPR of your attendance. So basically this acts as a sign-in sheet since we're not in person. So please make sure that you follow the instructions, send the email to me, lindsay@yourcoastalliving.com, with the information requested in the chat. Also, if you go by Rich, but your name is Richard on your license, please, 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 again, make sure that you give me the full name on your license because otherwise they will shoot that back to us and not give you credit. Thank you, everyone.